I watched through my bedroom window as Margaret crept across my driveway at 2 in the morning. Her flashlight beam danced across my garage door as she fumbled with something in her hands. My heart pounded as I realized what she was about to do. She was actually going to break into my garage to steal my car. What Margaret did not know was that 3 police officers were watching her every move from unmarked vehicles parked down the street. What she did not know was that the car she was so obsessed with was not just any ordinary vehicle. What she did not know was that, for the past 6 months, I had been working with law enforcement to build an airtight case against her reign of terror in our neighborhood. As I watched her force open my garage door, I whispered into my phone to Detective Martinez. That was the moment Margaret crossed the line from neighborhood bully to convicted felon. 6 months earlier, I pulled into the driveway of my new home with nothing but hope and excitement. After years of apartment living, I finally owned a piece of the American dream. The suburban street looked perfect with its manicured lawns and friendly neighbors waving from their porches. I had no idea that my peaceful new life was about to become a nightmare. Margaret Henderson appeared at my front door before I even finished unloading my first box. She stood there in her pressed khaki pants and HOA president badge, clipboard in hand, looking like she owned the entire neighborhood. Her smile was cold and calculated as she introduced herself. "Welcome to Maple Grove Estates," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am Margaret, your HOA president. We need to discuss some immediate concerns about your property." I barely had my keys in the door, but Margaret was already pointing out violations. My moving truck was parked illegally according to Section 12 of the HOA bylaws. My temporary mailbox was not the approved style. Even the color of my front door mat was apparently against community standards. "I understand you are new," Margaret continued, scribbling notes on her clipboard. "But ignorance of our rules is not an excuse. You will receive your first official violation notice within 48 hours. I tried to stay calm and reasonable. Moving is stressful enough without dealing with petty bureaucracy. I explained that I was still getting settled and asked if she could give me a week to address any concerns. Margaret looked at me like I had just asked her to burn down the neighborhood. "Rules are rules," she said sharply. "They exist for a reason. If we make exceptions for one person, then everyone will expect special treatment." Over the next few days, I learned that Margaret had been terrorizing Maple Grove Estates for over 5 years. She prowled the streets every morning with her measuring tape and camera, documenting every blade of grass that grew too tall. She issued fines for children leaving bicycles in their own driveways. She demanded that residents remove Christmas decorations within 24 hours of the holiday. My neighbor Tom quietly warned me about her during a brief conversation by our mailboxes. He spoke in hushed tones, constantly looking over his shoulder as if Margaret might appear at any moment. "She made my wife cry last month," Tom whispered. "Our garden gnome was apparently too whimsical for community standards. We had to remove it or face $500 in daily fines." Other neighbors shared similar horror stories. Margaret had forced elderly Mrs. Chen to repaint her entire house because the shade of beige was not approved. She made the Johnson family remove their children's swing set because it violated sight line regulations. She even tried to ban pets from walking on the common areas because dog paws might damage the grass. I realized that Margaret did not just enforce rules. She used them as weapons to control and intimidate everyone around her. She thrived on the fear and submission of her neighbors. She had created a dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. But Margaret had no idea who she was dealing with. She assumed I would be just another victim to add to her collection. She was about to learn that some people fight back when cornered, and some people have resources that neighborhood bullies never expect. As I watched Margaret march up my driveway for the third time that week, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to let this woman destroy my peace or terrorize my community any longer. The war between us was about to begin, and I already knew how it would end. Margaret's harassment escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. She began showing up at my house multiple times per day, always with new violations and fresh demands. She measured my grass with a ruler, photographed my mailbox from 12 different angles, and documented every minor imperfection she could find. Then I made a decision that would drive Margaret absolutely insane. I parked a new car in my driveway. To most people, it looked like an ordinary sedan, dark blue, clean, unremarkable. But there was something about this car that triggered Margaret's control obsession like nothing I had ever seen. "What is that vehicle?" Margaret demanded, marching up to my front door the morning after the car appeared. "I need to see registration, insurance, and proof that it complies with our vehicle standards." I calmly explained that the car belonged to me and was legally parked on my own property. Margaret was not satisfied with this reasonable response. She began taking dozens of photos of the vehicle from every possible angle. She walked around it like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. "This car is suspicious," Margaret declared. "It does not belong in our community. I am going to research its history and find out exactly why you are hiding it here." Her obsession with the car consumed her completely. She started parking across the street for hours, watching and waiting for me to move it. She knocked on my door demanding to know where I drove it and why I needed such a vehicle. She even tried to peek through my garage windows to see if I was hiding more cars inside. Meanwhile, other neighbors began approaching me with their own Margaret horror stories. They spoke in whispers, always checking to make sure she was not within earshot. The fear in their voices was heartbreaking. "She sued us last year," whispered Sarah from 3 houses down. "Our son left his skateboard on our front porch overnight. Margaret claimed it was commercial equipment and demanded we pay $1,500 in fines." Another neighbor, David, told me how Margaret had reported his family to Child Protective Services because their children played outside past 8 p.m. She claimed unsupervised minors were a community safety violation. "We are all prisoners in our own homes," David said sadly. "Nobody dares to challenge her because she has connections with the city council and the police department. She always gets her way." But Margaret was making a crucial mistake. Her obsession with my car was causing her to cross legal boundaries. She began entering my property without permission to inspect and photograph the vehicle. She left threatening notes on my windshield. She even tried to run the license plate through some kind of database search. I documented every single incident, every photo, every threat, every illegal trespass. I was building a file that would soon become very important. Margaret thought she was investigating me, but she had no idea that I was investigating her. The car sat in my driveway like bait in a trap. Margaret circled it obsessively, getting bolder and more desperate with each passing day. She demanded that I remove it immediately or face legal consequences. She claimed it violated noise ordinances, even though it was always parked and silent. "That car does not belong here," Margaret screamed during one of her daily visits. "I know there is something wrong with it, and I am going to prove it." She had no idea how right she was. There was definitely something very special about that car. But the truth was far more dangerous to Margaret than anything she could have imagined. Her obsession was about to become her downfall, and I was going to enjoy every minute of watching it happen. Margaret's final ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered with the dramatic flair of a court summons. She stood on my doorstep in her power suit, flanked by two other HOA board members who looked uncomfortable with the entire situation. "You have exactly 24 hours to remove that vehicle from the premises," Margaret announced, reading from an official-looking document. "Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and daily fines of $200. I read through her demands carefully. The charges were completely fabricated. According to Margaret, my car violated 7 different community standards, including unauthorized commercial use, improper vehicle storage, and community aesthetic disruption. None of these accusations had any basis in reality or HOA bylaws. "This is harassment," I said calmly. "You are making up rules that do not exist." Margaret's face turned red with rage. "How dare you question my authority? I have been protecting this community for 5 years. I know every rule, every regulation, every standard that keeps this neighborhood safe and beautiful. Then show me where in the official HOA documents it says I cannot park my personal vehicle in my own driveway," I challenged. Margaret sputtered and fumbled through her papers. She could not produce any legitimate rule because none existed. Her entire case was built on personal preference and power addiction, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her threats. "I do not need to justify myself to you," Margaret declared. "The board has voted unanimously to take action against your non-compliance." I looked at the two board members behind her. They avoided eye contact and shifted uncomfortably. It was obvious they were afraid of Margaret and went along with her decisions to avoid becoming targets themselves. That afternoon, I tried one final attempt at reasonable resolution. I invited Margaret to sit down and discuss the situation like adults. I offered to move the car to a different spot on my property if she could explain her specific concerns. I even suggested involving a neutral mediator to help us find common ground. Margaret rejected every compromise. She was not interested in solving problems or finding solutions. She wanted total submission and absolute control. In her mind, questioning her authority was a crime that deserved maximum punishment. "You think you are smart," Margaret hissed during our final conversation. "You think you can come into my neighborhood and disrespect everything I have built here. But I have news for you. I have connections. I have power. I have resources you cannot even imagine." She was not finished with her threats. Over the next week, I discovered that Margaret had been busy researching my background, contacting my employer, and even filing false reports with various city departments. She claimed I was running an illegal business from my home. She reported suspected drug activity based on the number of visitors to my house. She even suggested I might be involved in some kind of criminal enterprise. When I contacted the police about Margaret's harassment and false reports, I was disappointed by their initial response. The desk sergeant listened politely, but seemed hesitant to take action against someone with Margaret's reputation and connections. "Look, I understand your frustration," Officer Johnson said, "but Margaret Henderson has been a pillar of this community for years. She helps us keep the neighborhood safe and property values high. Are you sure this is not just a misunderstanding?" I realized that Margaret's influence ran deeper than I had thought. She had cultivated relationships with local authorities and positioned herself as an ally of law enforcement. Her years of reporting every minor infraction had created a reputation as someone who helped maintain order. But Margaret had made a critical error in judgment. Her obsession with my car and her escalating threats were about to cross a line that even her connections could not protect her from. She was planning something drastic, and I could see the desperation growing in her eyes with each passing day. The trap was almost ready. Margaret's own arrogance and need for control were about to lead her into a situation she could never escape. All I had to do was wait for her to make the final move that would transform her from neighborhood tyrant into convicted criminal. Margaret had no idea that her next decision would be the biggest mistake of her life. 3 weeks after Margaret's ultimatum, I sat in Detective Martinez's office, revealing the truth about my situation. What I told him changed everything about how law enforcement viewed the Margaret Henderson problem. "I am Detective Kevin Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department," I began, showing my badge and credentials. "I moved to Maple Grove Estates as part of an undercover investigation into HOA abuse and civil rights violations." Detective Martinez leaned forward with interest. "We have received dozens of complaints about Margaret Henderson over the past 2 years, but every time we try to build a case, witnesses get scared and refuse to cooperate." I explained how Margaret's reign of terror had been documented in detail over the past 6 months. I had recordings of her threats, photographs of her trespassing, and testimony from neighbors who were finally ready to speak up with proper protection. "The car in my driveway is not just any vehicle," I continued. "It is equipped with hidden cameras and tracking devices. Every time Margaret approaches it, harasses me about it, or makes threats, we have everything recorded in high definition." The real genius of the operation was how we used Margaret's own obsession against her. Her fixation on the car made her increasingly reckless and desperate. She had already committed multiple misdemeanors in her attempts to investigate and control the situation. She has been researching the vehicle registration, following me when I drive it, and making increasingly specific threats about what she plans to do if I do not remove it, I explained. "Based on her escalating behavior patterns, we believe she is planning to take direct action." Detective Martinez reviewed the evidence files I had compiled. Hours of audio recordings, hundreds of photographs, detailed logs of every interaction. The case against Margaret was already solid for harassment and stalking charges, but we were building towards something much bigger. "We want to catch her in the act of committing a serious felony," I said. "Breaking and entering, attempted theft, destruction of property. Something that will put her away long enough to break her control over the community." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would give Margaret exactly what she wanted most: access to the mysterious car that had been driving her insane. But that access would come at the cost of her freedom. Hidden cameras were installed throughout my garage and driveway. Unmarked police vehicles would be positioned around the neighborhood. The car itself was equipped with motion sensors and GPS tracking that would alert us the moment someone touched it. "Margaret's behavior has become increasingly erratic and desperate," Detective Martinez noted. "She is making bigger threats and taking bigger risks. It is only a matter of time before she crosses the line into serious criminal activity." I had mixed feelings about using deception to catch Margaret, even though she had been terrorizing innocent people for years. But sometimes, the only way to stop a bully is to let them reveal their true nature when they think nobody is watching. "The neighbors deserve to live in peace," I reminded myself. "Children should be able to play in their own yards without fear. Families should not have to walk on eggshells in their own homes." Margaret's final downfall would come from her own choices. We were not forcing her to commit crimes. We were simply creating an opportunity for her to show everyone who she really was beneath the mask of community leadership. The trap was set perfectly. All we had to do was wait for Margaret's obsession and arrogance to lead her into the cage she had built for herself. Based on her recent behavior, we would not have to wait very long. Margaret Henderson was about to learn that some people you should never underestimate, and some cars are more than they appear to be. At exactly 1:47 a.m. on a moonless Thursday night, my phone buzzed with the alert I had been waiting for. Motion sensors around my garage had detected movement. I crept to my bedroom window and watched Margaret's shadowy figure creeping across my driveway like a burglar in the night. She was dressed head to toe in black clothing, carrying a flashlight and what appeared to be a crowbar. This was not the polished HOA president who demanded compliance during daylight hours. This was someone who had completely lost control and was willing to commit serious crimes to satisfy her obsession. I whispered into my phone to Detective Martinez, who was monitoring the situation from an unmarked vehicle 2 blocks away. "She is here. She is moving toward the garage. All cameras are recording." Margaret approached the garage door with the confidence of someone who believed she was above the law. She had spent so many years wielding authority without consequences that she genuinely thought she could break into my property and face no serious repercussions. The garage door was secured with a standard lock, but Margaret had come prepared. She began working on the mechanism with tools she had obviously researched and practiced with. Her movements were deliberate and planned. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. "My God," I whispered, watching her methodically force entry into my garage. "She is actually doing it." Margaret succeeded in opening the garage door after about 10 minutes of careful work. She slipped inside like a professional thief, her flashlight beam dancing across the walls as she located the car. The motion-activated cameras captured every moment in crystal-clear detail. What happened next revealed the depth of Margaret's desperation and rage. She did not just want to move the car or damage it. She wanted to search it, investigate it, and prove whatever conspiracy theories had been consuming her mind for months. Margaret began by trying to open the car doors. When she found them locked, she used her crowbar to attempt forced entry. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the garage as she worked to break into the vehicle she had become obsessed with. "She is trying to break into the car," I reported to Detective Martinez. "Multiple felony charges in progress: breaking and entering, attempted theft, destruction of property." But Margaret was not finished. Her flashlight revealed something in the back seat that made her gasp with excitement. She had found what she believed was evidence of some kind of illegal activity. In reality, it was standard police equipment that had been left there intentionally. "I knew it," Margaret whispered to herself, not realizing that her every word was being recorded. "I knew there was something suspicious about this car. Wait until everyone sees what I found." Margaret's next decision sealed her fate completely. Instead of leaving with her supposed evidence, she decided to steal the entire vehicle. She began searching for keys, checking under floor mats and in the glove compartment. When she could not find them, she tried to hotwire the ignition. The irony was perfect. Margaret had spent months accusing me of criminal activity, and now she was committing actual crimes trying to prove her false accusations. Her own paranoia and need for control had transformed her into exactly the kind of person she claimed to be protecting the neighborhood from. "She is attempting to steal the vehicle," I reported. "Grand theft auto in progress." Detective Martinez's voice crackled through my phone. "Units are moving into position. Let her get fully committed to the theft before we intervene." Margaret worked frantically under the dashboard, trying to start the car through illegal means. Her desperation was obvious as she realized that her window of opportunity was closing. She had crossed the point of no return and was now fully committed to Grand Theft Auto. The moment the engine turned over, Margaret's face lit up with triumph. She had successfully stolen what she believed was evidence of my criminal activity. She was about to drive away with proof that would vindicate her months of harassment and investigation. But as Margaret shifted the car into reverse, the garage suddenly flooded with bright lights. Police vehicles surrounded the property from every direction. Armed officers took positions behind their cars, weapons drawn, shouting commands through megaphones. "This is the police. Turn off the engine and exit the vehicle with your hands visible." Margaret sat frozen behind the wheel, her mouth hanging open in shock. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. She was not exposing a criminal conspiracy. She was the criminal, caught red-handed in the act of stealing a car. The look on Margaret's face was something I will never forget. 5 years of absolute power and control had come crashing down in a single moment of perfect justice. Margaret's arrest was swift and thorough. Detective Martinez and his team treated her exactly like any other criminal caught in the act of stealing a car. No special consideration for her HOA position, no deference to her community connections. Just handcuffs, Miranda rights, and a trip to the county jail. "Margaret Henderson, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted grand theft auto, destruction of property, and criminal trespassing," Detective Martinez announced as officers led her away from my garage. The shock on Margaret's face was absolutely priceless. She kept looking around like she expected someone to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. She could not comprehend that her actions had real consequences or that her authority meant nothing to actual law enforcement. "This is ridiculous," Margaret protested as they put her in the back of the police car. "I was investigating suspicious activity. I was protecting our community." But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Hours of high-definition video showing Margaret planning, breaking in, and attempting to steal a vehicle. Audio recordings of her admitting to the theft. Physical evidence of the damage she caused to my garage door and car. When Margaret's case went to court 3 months later, the prosecution had built an airtight case that even her expensive lawyer could not challenge. The video evidence was so clear and damning that Margaret eventually accepted a plea bargain to avoid even harsher sentences. But the criminal charges were just the beginning of Margaret's downfall. Once her arrest became public knowledge, other victims of her harassment finally found the courage to come forward with their own stories and evidence. Tom from next door filed a civil lawsuit for the emotional distress Margaret had caused his family. Mrs. Chen sued for the thousands of dollars she had spent repainting her house based on Margaret's fake violations. The Johnson family demanded compensation for the swing set they were forced to remove. Within 6 months, Margaret faced over 20 separate civil lawsuits from neighbors seeking damages for years of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. The financial burden was enormous, but the social consequences were even more devastating. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Margaret from her position and ban her from holding any community leadership role in the future. An independent audit of her 5-year tenure revealed dozens of violations of HOA bylaws and fiduciary responsibilities. Margaret Henderson abused her position to intimidate and control residents for personal satisfaction rather than community benefit, the audit report concluded. Her actions violated the basic principles of homeowner association governance and caused significant harm to community morale. New leadership was elected within a month, and their first action was to review and eliminate many of the petty rules Margaret had created to harass residents. The measuring tape tyranny was over. Children could play in their yards again. Families could decorate their homes without fear. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching Margaret's reputation crumble completely. The woman who had built her identity around being a pillar of the community was now known as the disgraced former HOA president who got arrested for stealing cars. Local news covered the story with the kind of detail that makes people remember. HOA president arrested for car theft was the headline that followed Margaret wherever she went. Job interviews, social events, even grocery shopping became exercises in public humiliation. Margaret eventually moved away from Maple Grove Estates, unable to face the daily reminder of her disgrace. The house that had been her command center for years of neighborhood terrorism sat empty for months before finally selling at a significant loss. The legal system had worked exactly as it should. Margaret's years of abusing authority and terrorizing innocent people had finally caught up with her. The badges and titles that had protected her from consequences meant nothing when she crossed the line into serious criminal behavior. Detective Martinez later told me that our operation had been one of the most satisfying cases of his career. Bullies like Margaret think they are untouchable until they meet someone who refuses to be intimidated, he said. You gave her exactly enough rope to hang herself. The neighborhood transformation was remarkable. Within months of Margaret's removal, Maple Grove Estates became the kind of community it was supposed to be all along. Neighbors talked to each other again. Children played outside without fear. Families could take pride in their homes without worrying about petty harassment. Justice had been served completely and thoroughly. Margaret got exactly what she deserved, and everyone else got their freedom back. 2 years later, Maple Grove Estates had transformed into everything a community should be. The reign of terror was over, replaced by genuine neighborly cooperation and mutual respect. Children rode their bicycles freely through the streets. Families hosted barbecues without measuring their grass first. The fear that had hung over our neighborhood like a dark cloud had finally lifted. The new HOA leadership focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood cleanups, holiday celebrations, and safety programs that brought people together instead of driving them apart. The contrast with Margaret's dictatorship was remarkable. Tom and his family had recovered from the trauma of Margaret's harassment. Their children played openly in the yard, and their garden gnome had returned to its place of honor by the front door. We never thought we would feel safe in our own home again, Tom told me during a recent conversation. Thank you for giving us our lives back. Mrs. Chen had repainted her house in a beautiful shade of yellow that actually violated the old color restrictions. Nobody cared. The new board had eliminated dozens of Margaret's made-up rules and returned to sensible guidelines that focused on genuine community standards rather than personal control. The mysterious car that had driven Margaret to her downfall had served its purpose and been returned to the police department. In its place, I parked my regular vehicle without any drama or harassment. The simple act of parking in my own driveway had become normal again. But the most important change was not what people could see. It was what they could feel. The atmosphere of fear and submission had been replaced by genuine community spirit. Neighbors helped each other with yard work, shared tools, and looked out for each other's children. This was how neighborhoods were supposed to work. I often reflected on the lessons learned from our battle with Margaret. Standing up to bullies requires patience, documentation, and sometimes creative solutions. The legal system works when you give it solid evidence and clear violations. Most importantly, communities can heal and thrive once toxic leadership is removed. My advice to anyone facing similar situations is simple but crucial. Document everything. Keep records of every interaction, every threat, every illegal action. Build relationships with neighbors who are also being victimized. Work within the system rather than outside it. And never underestimate the power of giving bullies enough rope to hang themselves. Margaret's final legal consequences included 2 years probation, community service, and restitution payments to her victims. She was prohibited from holding any HOA positions and required to complete anger management counseling. The woman who had terrorized our community for 5 years was now being supervised by the same legal system she had thought she could manipulate. The last I heard, Margaret was living in a different state, hopefully having learned that authority without accountability always leads to destruction. Some people change when they face consequences. Others simply find new places to cause trouble. Either way, she was no longer our problem. Maple Grove Estates had become proof that communities can overcome toxic leadership and rebuild stronger than before. The children who had been afraid to play outside were now teenagers who remembered the lessons about standing up to bullies. The neighbors who had been intimidated into silence were now confident community leaders themselves. The car theft that destroyed Margaret's life had saved dozens of others. Sometimes justice requires patience and strategy rather than direct confrontation. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to give them exactly what they think they want. Our neighborhood was finally free, and freedom felt absolutely wonderful.